So I'm going to talk a little bit about some elements of talking data. As Christy mentioned, I was responsible for developing the program for the conference. And while I did have a committee that helped me, and I offered them a number of options, probably because I did the best job animating and elaborating the topic that most closely aligns with my own research, it turned out that the conference and my own personal research interests were very closely aligned. So not entirely by intention, but nor entirely by coincidence. So the theme was talking data, and the key point here is that it's about more than measuring and putting the data to good use. So what we're looking at in this conference is what happens after the evaluation is done, after the measures are measured, after the analysis has been done. How are we going to make sure that the hard work we put into that all that's been done up to that point then goes on to have impact itself? And people understood this in two different ways in the conference, which actually was interesting to me because I had envisioned the first way, which is what I mostly pay attention to, which is understanding the different ways that we communicate data and how that affects how stakeholders interact with the organization, how we can shape the interaction of stakeholders through our communications. What came from the conference, which I found really exciting, and Anshula is going to speak more to this in a bit, is getting the data itself to talk to each other so that we are amalgamating organization or project level data into something that means more or is bigger. Our keynote speaker on the first day was a woman named Trina Chasen. She's very young, she's a computer programmer, but she's developing kind of a cult following for her ability to talk about data visualization. The image on the right is a screen capture from her online book. It is completely free. It was written by her and a bunch of colleagues, and it talks about how to do data visualization. So if this is something you're interested in doing, the link will be attached to the slides that get sent out, or you can simply Google the phrases you see on the screen. Chapters 14 to 17 or something are really about best practices in data visualization, how to do data visualization, why to do data visualization, etc. The first 13 or so chapters are more on how to gather and clean data, so if you're a qualitative person, you might find it interesting, otherwise glaze over it. Trina's key point, which I found really interesting, is that people interact differently with the same data depending on how it's presented. She focuses on quantitative data. I tend to focus on both data as both qualitative and quantitative, but her talk was about getting numbers to tell a story in a way that tables of numbers or spreadsheets of numbers can't. The image on the left is an image that Trina presented, and I've since spent a bit more time researching. You all might be familiar with it. This is a picture that Florence Nightingale drew about the British Army in India and causes of death per 1,000 in India. The different colors represent different causes of death, and she was able to use this diagram to advocate for the role of better sanitation in improving soldiers' health outcomes. Trina claims it is one of the first data visualizations created. I think what's key about this visualization, that if we're looking for key takeaways from the conference, is that it's visualizing a whole data set. I'm going to show some other examples. I tried to find some good examples of data visualization in the social reporting, and I think it is very telling that I couldn't find any. But I did find this from something called 17 Best Data Visualizations in the Nonprofit Sector. And this is an infographic. I think this is an example of what we're not talking about. This is not where we're trying to go. So what often happens when we talk about data visualization is making little bits of data look pretty. And that's what this chart has done. So you just look around, there's little bits of numbers here and there, and they're little factoids that have been well decorated. Whereas if this data here that Florence Nightingale has is a whole data set. The other thing we think about when we think about combining data and stories that often happens in reports is something like this, where on the left you have the story that engages our stakeholders, in this case probably are targeted donors, from a particular individual case study, a quote from the participant, and then on the right, a whole bunch of numbers to perhaps deepen or collaborate the story. But again, the numbers themselves aren't telling the story. They are sort of the hard, sober accompaniment to a story.